Imagine this. You're walking through the streets of Manhattan on a quiet afternoon, just another day in one of the busiest cities in the world. But in a blinding flash, everything changes. Just as it did in 1945 when two atomic bombs, Little Boy and Fat Man, were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the first and only times nuclear weapons have ever been used in combat. The devastation was unimaginable. Two entire cities were wiped out, and tens of thousands of lives were lost in an instant. The world had never seen such destruction. But what if it happened again? What if a bomb, like the one that obliterated Nagasaki, were to detonate right in the heart of New York City? How much devastation would it cause? And what would it mean for one of the largest cities on Earth and the rest of the world? But that's not the only chilling scenario this video will explore. It will also examine what would happen if the threat wasn't a relic of the past, but a modern nuclear missile, a more likely scenario and a far more powerful threat. What would be left of the city, and could anyone survive? Keep watching to find out. Now, even though we're discussing a hypothetical scenario, hopefully, we like to keep things real. That's why we know one of the first questions that might arise is, why New York City? After all, there are far more obvious targets in a nuclear conflict, targets like Washington, D.C., the nuclear silos, or military installations such as the Pentagon, the Norfolk Naval Base in Virginia, or the Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. Even Camp David was named as one of the potential targets for a Russian nuclear attack right on Russian state TV. So why New York City? Well, for one, its density. With over 8 million people packed into a relatively small area of roughly 300 square miles, NYC is one of the most densely populated cities in the world. A nuclear strike here would result in catastrophic civilian casualties and maximize immediate destruction. And that's precisely what anyone vicious enough to launch a nuclear attack would want. However, there's another reason why NYC might end up on the receiving end of a nuclear strike: counter-value targeting. This strategy focuses on attacking civilian populations and key economic centers, aiming to inflict maximum damage on the enemy's will to fight. New York City, as a global financial hub and cultural icon, fits the bill perfectly. With this in mind, let's explore how this unprecedented chaos would unfold. Let's travel to the New York City that's about to get hit with a nuclear bomb. First, an ear-splitting roar shatters the air. A blinding flash engulfs everything, brighter than the sun, illuminating the cityscape in a surreal glow. For a brief moment, time stands still. A nuclear bomb similar to the Fat Man, the atomic bomb with a 21 kiloton yield, has been detonated roughly 1,650 feet above New York City. A fireball erupts, expanding with furious speed. Within around 10 seconds, it swells to a monstrous 730 feet in diameter. Anything caught within its searing sphere, skyscrapers, buildings, and countless lives, is vaporized in an instant. After all, this fireball reaches temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. Such an infernal glow can only consume everything in its path, and it doesn't stop there. The sheer strength of the detonation creates an intense shockwave ripping through the city. Traveling at hundreds of miles per hour, this blast wave radiates outwards, flattening everything like a child's toy. At a distance of roughly 0.5 miles, buildings designed to withstand the elements buckle under pressure. Heavy concrete structures, once symbol of strength, are reduced to mere rubble. Times Square, the Empire State Building, and the Chrysler Building, towering giants of human achievement, because they stand mere blocks away from the heart of the apocalypse, their fate is sealed. In the perilous zone, casualties mount. At an overpressure of 20 pounds per square inch, fatalities are close to 100%. The benchmark for heavy damage in urban environments has been met. Lives are extinguished without mercy. By the time the dust settles in, the death toll will climb to a staggering 287,660 people. Another 515,160 will be injured, and that's not even accounting for the fallout. For now, we're still experiencing the deadly effects of the blast zone. Even at a great distance from ground zero, injuries are devastating. People find themselves gasping for breath, their lungs ravaged by the violent wave of pressure. Eardrums rupture under the strain, leaving survivors disoriented and confused. Internal bleeding becomes a grim reality for many, the silent killer stalking the wounded. And as if the blast wave wasn't enough, a literal inferno is unleashed. The thermal radiation bursts forth with an intensity that transforms New York City into a hellscape. Within a radius of approximately 1.37 miles, an unthinkable horror awaits. The heat is so fierce that it incinerates flesh, igniting everything from clothing to buildings. Those within this swathe are subjected to a heat so extreme, approximately 57.3 calories per square inch, that third-degree burns are the only possible outcome. The layers of the skin are destroyed, often without pain, as the very nerves meant to signal suffering are obliterated. But the absence of pain doesn't diminish the ongoing horror. The initial explosion sets off a chain reaction of flames that merges into a colossal firestorm, a beast of heat and destruction. This self-fueling inferno sweeps across 6 square miles of Manhattan, swallowing entire blocks and creating swirling winds that fan the flames even higher. Considering Manhattan's total area is approximately 22.7 square miles, this devastation would consume over a quarter of the island, leaving much of its iconic landscape unrecognizable. In the core area of Manhattan, there's Broadway, Central Park, the New York Public Library, Fifth Avenue. Surrounding it, you have Hell's Kitchen, Chelsea, Greenwich Village, Soho, East Village, each neighborhood becoming a casualty of this unrestrained destruction. But the fire doesn't signify the end of the horror. As the flames devour Manhattan, a more insidious threat begins to emerge: radiation, the unseen specter of doom. High levels of ionizing radiation suffocate the environment, contaminating everything it touches. Those caught in the open are exposed to doses reaching 500 Rontgen equivalent man, a lethal amount that seals their fate within weeks. Symptoms arise slowly, creeping into the lives of survivors. In just 1 month, about 15% of these victims will face an agonizing death. But radiation emitted during the nuclear explosion itself isn't the only danger. There's also the radiation fallout, which occurs after the initial blast, a toxic rain that drizzles down from the sky, carrying death with it. Radiation particles, lifted high into the stratosphere, begin their descent, carried by winds that affect anyone they touch. This fallout blankets the ruins of Manhattan. The initial fallout creates an immediate zone of devastation, but the danger spreads far beyond ground zero. The only good thing about this bomb, if we can call it good, is that it's detonated via an air burst, just like the Fat Man. This means that the burst height is too high to produce significant local fallout. Within the first 48 hours, the fallout risk reaches its peak. Initially, exposed areas at sea level soar to an astonishing 1,000 Rontgen per hour, a devastating wave that eventually diminishes but doesn't disappear. In just 2 more days, the radiation will taper to a mere 10 Rontgen per hour. However, the damage has already been done. Survivors exposed to this radiation face a relentless threat, a 50% chance of succumbing to acute radiation poisoning after absorbing just 350 Rontgen. In the years that follow, the possibilities of cancer looms large, casting a dark shadow over their futures. And this shadow will persist until the end of their lives. But the radioactive fallout isn't solely dangerous for the survivors. It also threatens the first responders. That's why nuclear weapons are the worst humanity can offer. Once they're used, there's little any emergency service can do. Still, let's examine what a possible emergency response would be after NYC had been hit with a nuclear weapon. The initial assessment would reveal 3 concentric damage zones, each demanding a different strategy and level of engagement. First, in the light damage zone, or LD, extending approximately 4 miles from ground zero, responders would encounter shattered windows and minor structural damage. Here, blast overpressures could reach around 0.5 to 3 pounds per square inch, enough to cause injuries from flying debris. Emergency services would work to clear roads, assist the injured, and establish communications with other zones. As responders move closer, they would enter the moderate damage, or MD zone, about 1.5 miles from the blast site in Manhattan. In this area, substantial destruction would be evident. Buildings might be partially collapsed, the utility lines downed. The situation here would be dire, with many injuries requiring immediate medical attention. The blast overpressure in the MD zone would range from 5 to 8 pounds per square inch, presenting further risks. Rescuers would need to coordinate their efforts to locate and triage survivors, while also addressing hazards like live wires, ruptured gas lines, and the ever-present threat of fires. Limited visibility from smoke and dust would further complicate operations. And then there's the severe damage, or SD zone, approximately 0.6 miles from ground zero. In this zone, the Manhattan's once famed cityscape would be utterly unrecognizable. Most structures would be reduced to rubble, and the high level of radiation would pose a severe risk to any responders entering the area. Although a few New Yorkers might survive in stable shelters, the overwhelming majority of them in this zone would likely perish. In the SD zone, blast pressures would exceed 8 pounds per square inch, creating an environment where quick rescue efforts would be nearly impossible due to impassable debris. And response here would be limited to searching for known survivors, as the risk to the emergency personnel would be extreme. With all this in mind, it's clear that New York City would face a long and challenging path to recovery, if recovery were even possible. After recounting this tragic, hypothetical scenario, we can only offer you a few minutes of relief. How so? Well, this scenario is quite unlikely to happen. Why? Well, because barriers to acquiring such a weapon are significant. Nuclear arms are tightly controlled and monitored by governments, making it exceedingly difficult for non-state actors or terrorist groups to gain access to such powerful weapons. Unfortunately, the same doesn't apply to nuclear states, and the #1 nuclear state in the world, Russia, is a sworn enemy of the US. This fact leaves us in a precarious position where the threat is not merely hypothetical. But your few moments of relief are over. It's time to discuss what Russia could unleash on New York City. In 2024, Russia possessed 5,580 nuclear warheads, making it one of the two superpowers that control 90% of the world's nuclear arsenal. This staggering figure is a remnant of the Cold War arms race, and it continues to evolve with modern capabilities. Out of these nearly 6,000 nuclear warheads, 1,588 are deployed on intercontinental missiles that can strike targets over 3,400 miles away. However, the real terror lies in Russia's infamous intercontinental ballistic missiles with a much greater range, the R-36, chillingly dubbed the Satan, and the newer RS-28 Sarmat, aka the Satan II. For our second hypothetical scenario, it's precisely the Satan II that will head to New York City, poised to deliver catastrophic destruction. Now, of course, if a nuclear war was to begin, there's no way only one missile would be launched from Russia to the US. But remember, we're only here to discuss what would happen if New York City was hit by a nuclear missile. The worst part of the terrifying RS-28 Sarmat missile is that it can carry up to 15 warheads, each independently targetable. This means that Russia might launch a single missile but hit multiple locations across New York City with pinpoint accuracy. And that's not all. The Satan II can unleash a terrifying energy yield of 15 megatons of TNT. That's 1,000 times more powerful than the Little Boy dropped on Hiroshima, which released a mere 15 kilotons. And it's also approximately 700 times more powerful than the 21 kiloton Fat Man, whose devastation you've already witnessed in this video. It goes without saying that the implications of such a yield are staggering. But don't forget, we're talking about a joint yield. So let's say each warhead hitting NYC has an approximately 1 megaton yield. What kind of damage can a single Satan II warhead do? The Satan II is launched from a land-based silo in southern Siberia, covering over 5,570 miles at a staggering speed of Mach 20. Its flight time is alarmingly short, taking just 30 to 35 minutes to reach its destination, Manhattan, New York City. At ground zero, a fireball erupts with a radius of 0.75 miles, engulfing an area of 1.77 square miles in searing heat. Everything within this zone, buildings, cars, and people, is instantly vaporized, reduced to nothing in the blink of an eye. Again, the heat is hotter than the surface of the sun, incinerating anything caught in its fiery grasp. Beyond the fireball, a shockwave rips through the city. At 3.16 miles, moderate blast damage begins, covering an area of 31.4 square miles. Houses and apartment buildings collapse as if they were made of paper. Fire ignites everywhere, spreading quickly through ruptured gas lines and overturned structures. Fatalities are widespread, and injuries are nearly universal in this zone. The thermal radiation spreads across a 7.81-mile radius, engulfing an area of 192 square miles. Remember, the entire of Manhattan Island is only 22.7 square miles. This means the thermal radiation alone covers nearly 9 times the area of Manhattan. Within this enormous range, anyone caught outside likely suffers third-degree burns, skin scorched beyond recognition. For many, survival would mean permanent disfigurement or amputation. Even further out, the light blast damage extends to a radius of 8.18 miles, covering an area of 210 square miles. Here, windows shatter as the explosion's pressure wave reaches them. Thousands are cut by flying glass, unaware that the blinding flash from the blast outran the shockwave. Injuries in this zone include broken bones, deep lacerations, and shrapnel wounds from debris. In total, an estimated 1.26 million people are expected to die, with 1.85 million more injured. That's over 3 million people affected in an instant. And this doesn't even account for the long-term radiation and fallout that would render the city uninhabitable for years to come. So with a single 1 megaton warhead from the Satan II, the heart of New York City would be decimated. With 15 of them, the destruction would be on an unimaginable scale. Each warhead could be aimed at a different part of the city or its surrounding areas: Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, the Bronx, Long Island, New Jersey. Each warhead would unleash the same horrifying power, creating overlapping zones of devastation that could effectively wipe out the entire New York metropolitan area. But believe it or not, we've not come to the worst part. The 15 megaton yield we've used as the basis for this scenario is just the bottom prediction for the Satan II's yield. Top one, 50 megatons, more than 3 times what we've just described. Imagine that, 50 megatons, not spread across 15 warheads, but concentrated in a single devastating blast. The fireball alone would vaporize everything within a 5-mile radius. That's Manhattan gone. Now you might think there's no way this beast of a warhead will ever be made, but what if we told you it already has been? The Soviet-made Tsar bomber, the most powerful nuclear weapon ever detonated, had a yield of 50 megatons of TNT. Designed by the Soviet Union and detonated on October 30, 1961 over the Novaya Zemlya archipelago in the Arctic Ocean, this nuclear bomb dwarfed every weapon before and after it. The bomb was 26 feet long and weighed almost 60,000 pounds, so large that the Tu-95 bomber that carried it had to be modified to accommodate the monstrous payload. It was fitted with a parachute weighing nearly 1,800 pounds to slow its descent, giving the bomber and its crew a chance to escape the immediate blast zone, though even then, their survival was uncertain. The bomb detonated 13,000 feet above the ground, a height chosen to maximize its area of destruction. The resulting explosion was unimaginable. The fireball alone was 5 miles wide, and the mushroom cloud reached a height of 40 miles, 7 times the height of Mount Everest. The shockwave circled the Earth 3 times, and windows shattered as far as 560 miles away in Norway and Finland. The light from the blast was visible more than 600 miles away. As for the more immediate vicinity of Ground Zero, the consequences were beyond catastrophic. Buildings in nearby Severny, 34 miles from Ground Zero, were obliterated. Even at 100 miles away, structures were damaged, and at 170 miles, people still felt the heat. The shockwave even caused the bomber to drop by over half a mile in altitude, despite its distance from the blast. But what do all of these numbers mean for the fate of New York City and the entire US in our hypothetical scenario? If a nuclear weapon similar to the Tsar bomber was dropped on the ill-fated Manhattan, its fireball would vaporize everything within a 3-mile radius. Buildings, infrastructure, and people would be instantly turned to ash. Central Park, Times Square, the Empire State Building, all gone in a flash of unimaginable heat and light. The fireball alone would stretch beyond the width of Manhattan, reaching into parts of the Bronx, Queens, and Brooklyn. But the devastation doesn't end there. The heavy blast damage would extend nearly 5.6 miles, leveling buildings across Manhattan and deep into Brooklyn, Queens, and Jersey City. In this zone, almost every structure would be reduced to rubble, and casualties would be near 100%. Those not killed in the immediate blast would likely suffer fatal injuries from collapsing buildings, flying debris, and the immense pressure wave. Further out, the moderate blast damage zone would stretch a staggering 12.4 miles, affecting over 500 square miles of area. Residential buildings in this area would collapse, and fires would spread quickly across the city, feeding on the destruction caused by the initial explosion. From Hoboken to parts of Queens and Staten Island, widespread injuries and fatalities would occur as entire neighborhoods are decimated by the overpressure. The intense heat generated by the explosion would cause third-degree burns up to 37 miles away. In the suburbs of Long Island, Newark, and beyond, people would feel the effects of this heat. The sheer size and power of the Tsar bomber make it almost incomprehensible. This means that its effects wouldn't solely be felt in New York. Windows would shatter as far away as Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and even Quebec in Canada. The light from the explosion would be visible as far south as South Carolina, illuminating the sky like a second sun. The radiation zone would extend across much of the metropolitan area with a 500 Rontgen equivalent man radius stretching over 1.86 miles. In this area, radiation exposure would be fatal within a month for many not killed by the blast. Those who survived would face the horrific consequences of radiation poisoning, illness, cancer, and death. The fallout would spread far beyond the city, carried by the wind to blanket the surrounding areas in a deadly radioactive material. The only relief we can offer in this horrifying scenario is the fact that the Tsar bomber was never designed for practical warfare. The original design was meant to yield a mind-boggling 100 megatons, but this was scaled down due to concerns about the crew's survival and the unprecedented level of fallout it would create. But even at 50 megatons, the bomb was too large and unwieldy for any realistic military use. But rest assured, humanity is undoubtedly capable of creating a more practical nuclear weapon with the same monstrous yield. A yield that would instantly kill over 7.6 million people and injure another 4 million. A yield that would reduce one of the best-known cities in the world to rubble, a crater of ash and fire. And the aftermath of this strike, the world would change forever. The retaliatory strikes would likely trigger a global nuclear war, spelling the end of civilization as we know it. So let's hope none of these scenarios ever come to pass. But if they do, which scenario do you see as the most likely? Share your predictions in the comments section below. Now go and check out Can the United Kingdom Survive a Nuclear War? Or click this other video instead.